is not only what the speakers are telling us about, but kind of the doors they open. And I have this tendency to kind of follow them through. And I think it was just Mark mentioned a couple of weeks ago in his presentation, the more you learn about something, the more you find out you don't know. And in this case, it was that plus some unusual paths led to some places I had been before. So this is a little bit of the wander through the rabbit holes, if you will. And when I saw that Max was going to do his talk on the early days of computing at Cornell, I was reminded of another one of my COVID projects, and that was digging out this blue box that was in my garage. So this is it, my Minivac 601. Mm-hmm. And you can see it's not as nice as the picture that went out with Ken's email. It's a little dusty and dirty, and but it'd been sitting there since 1961 when this was released by Scientific Development Corporation. So I had pulled it out and started monkeying around and doing a little programming with it. And then when it was suggested maybe I could talk about it today, I did some research, and it, it's one of those things, you follow the thread and you get to all kinds of interesting places. At any rate, this was touted as a unique digital computer, the small brother of huge electronic brains that were the new tools of science and industry. Mm-hmm. So I assume they're talking about that IBM 650 that Max was working on at about that time. And so while Max was up there at Cornell writing compilers and teaching digital simulations, I was 10 years old with this machine trying to program tic-tac-toe. To put this into perspective a little bit, 1961 was when Robert Noyce was awarded the patent for the integrated circuits. So everything up to that time was pretty clunky looking, pretty mechanical looking. And this is a great example of it. You can see I got binary inputs down here with some switches and some secondary storage, and more switches, and some processing with these relays, and some output with some lights, a rotary input over here, and this little matrix that helped you deal with tic-tac-toe, basically. So when this a couple of advertisements from when this machine was released, kind of interesting in themselves. You see these are from Popular Science, that you might guess by the format of these things. $85 in 1961 is about $780 today. And it was touted as having $25,000 worth of development and research into it. You look at an ad a little bit later, and now it's hard to see, but in the body of this ad down here, it says, if you're one of those maintaining multi-million-dollar computers in your living room rather than the 17-pound, $135 Minivac 601 push button number 4. So already the price had gone up to $135. It's about $1,200 today. And it sold well into the homes and student population, but it didn't sell into corporations. So the solution to that was to paint that blue box gray and raise the price to $479, which was the equivalent of about $4,000. And by the time they'd increased that price 6 times, they were selling a ton of them to companies and things. Mm-hmm. Despite that price increase, all I could find on Scientific Development Corporation, the company that released this, was that they only lasted about 27 months. So obviously things are changing quickly. The other line that was touted in advertising with this was that it delights in tackling simulation assignments, machine coding and decoding. It decodes Morse code with ease. It transmits messages with differential spacing. And if those functions seem mundane, let Minivac compose poetry. Or in your more whimsical moods, have the Minivac tell you your fortune or accept its challenge to tic-tac-toe. Well, I mean, it won't come in as any surprise to you, I suppose, that I never got any poetry out of this machine. But it was pretty interesting. I have a short clip here that's interesting on a couple of levels. It's a clip from the Today Show in 1961 when this was released. And you'll see the presenter is John Chancellor. I didn't know he did this stuff, but he only lasted for a couple of years at this soft news business before he went on to more serious news. But it shows a lot about the time. I'll play a little bit of it here and cut it off and move along.
Whether we like it or not, computers seem to be taking over our world. New uses are being found almost daily for these machines.
Oops, what happened?
Virtually dependent upon them. Under the circumstances, many of us have from time to time found ourselves faced with a sort of intellectual dilemma. It is only natural for us to be curious about what a computer is and just how it works. On the other hand, however, most of us just don't have sufficient technical knowledge to understand the very complicated explanations that have usually been offered. Well, a few weeks ago, a new teaching device came on the market, and we have it here this morning. It's called the Minivac 601 computer. Technically, it is not a computer. You'd have to call it a computer simulator. It's a device intended to teach people in schools and other places how computers operate. Since I am eager to show off my newly acquired knowledge, acquired, I must confess, in the last 24 hours, having just learned how to make it work, I'm going to see if I can pass some of this information, which is fascinating, on to you. Now, this is one of the Minivac 601s we have with us today, and I'm going to turn it on, and it's doing essentially the same thing that we've seen the pictures of computers doing, clicking and flashing and carrying on and being kind of mysterious. Now let me quiet it down just for a moment. No, I'll get it. There. See? And I'll give you some explanation. Now, all the commotion you saw a moment ago was the Minivac's or any computer's way of counting. And that's all it was doing, just counting. And you have to bear in mind that there are two basic types of computers, digital and analog. This device is a digital. And a digital computer is basically capable of two primary functions, and that's all. No matter how, it can add and subtract, and that's it. No matter how complicated a problem can be, it can be solved by addition or subtraction, provided you're willing to take often a very long time. After all, multiplication, division, and these other things are simply shortcuts. And since computers work so quickly, they don't need these other methods. So to understand a computer, we must first of all understand how it counts. And since computers have neither fingers nor toes, as some of us use to do this on, they have only switches that either signal on or signal off, then a special system of counting has to be used. So we will try this now. As I press this button down here, the machine, I hope, will count one. It did. Now, all that happened was that a relay was switched on and a light lit on the machine. But in effect, the machine is remembering a number 1. Now, if I add another 1 to this figure, this is what happens. It remembers 2. One relay went off, the other went on, and 1 and 1 does make 2. But if I add another 1 to this total, it gets a little more complicated. The machine is now remembering 3. 2 and 1 are 3. That's the extent of my technical knowledge. And this, in its simplest sense, is how all digital computers count, by turning on a series of relays, on or off, until the final answer is reached. Of course, in practice, nobody is going to stand around punching a button as I've done for some of the big figures we have to use. Engineers had to find a much faster way of feeding numbers into a computer. Remember those cards you get in the mail sometimes? They say don't twist them or spindle them. Well, they are punch cards, and they're one way of getting numbers into a computer. At times, punch tape is used, and at other times, a dial, something like this, is used. First, I clear the machine, and I'm going to set this to 15. And I'm going to turn it on. Look at that. Ah, it's the wrong switch. Well, I knew that was going to happen sometime during this. I'm going to turn it to 15 again, believe me, and press that button. Is that the right one? That's the right one. The machine has counted up to 15. 8 and 4 is 12, 2 is 14, and 1 is 15. Now, if we want to add 9 to that, and I've fouled this all up again. Let's make it 15. And then let's add 9 to that. And I did it. 16 and 8 is 24. 15 and 9 is 24. And having survived that, I think I'll go on to the other machine. Now.
So, are you still with me?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. Kind of interesting how we tried to go through that and the problems he had. And live TV back then. I'm going to talk about the creator of that machine without mentioning his name and leave it open to you guys to yell out when you figured out who it is. I mean, I assume nobody knows who this might be right now, right? Okay. Well, it's not Tim Hartford.
Right, and didn't hit Google. I followed the rules. Did not hit
Excellent. Excellent. Well, it's not Tim Hartford, but I've got that name up there because as I started to research this 601 for this talk today, I was amazed to find out that I already knew quite a bit about the creator of that box. And that was from a podcast that I listened to regularly and a book that I read as a result of the podcast that was about this man. So Tim Hartford happens to be a Brit, Financial Times journalist, BBC, but he's got two of the world's top-rated podcasts. One of them that I listen to frequently is called Cautionary Tales. And the specific episode that talked about this guy it was called Frittering Away Genius. And it was really a podcast about the creative mind and the genius mind. That book or that podcast then led me to read a book called A Mind at Play, How Somebody Invented Something by Jim Sony and Rob Goodman. So it turns out this guy not only invented this box, but he invented, as mentioned in the newsletter, the flaming trumpet. He invented one of the first chess playing computers. This is it. It had only enough processing power to play the end game. And this is in 1949. He had 150 relays in it. Took about 15 seconds to make a move. So one of the first steps at AI, if you will, and chess playing machines, he created this miniature radio controlled bus and a controller and a gas pedal and a clutch and steering wheel. This thing is kind of interesting. It's a machine that measures the time that metallic juggling clubs are in and out of metallic gloves worn by the juggler. So the guy was interested in juggling, and he developed some theories of juggling and how many things it was possible to juggle. This, if you can guess, is a Rubik cube solver. So in his later years, he built this machine to mechanically solve Rubik cubes. He invented Theseus in 1951. This is a mouse that solved this maze. Again, built primarily on relays and switches. And it's one of the first examples, again, of machine learning. This mouse would wander around the maze till it figured it out, and then you could put it anywhere in the maze. It would find its way back to where you were, the target spot. Anybody got the guy yet? No. My money's safe. And this thing, this is considered to be the first wearable computer developed by the guy we're talking about and a guy named Ed Thorpe. And as it turns out, I happen to know about Ed Thorpe. He was a mathematician, and he's the father of modern card counting. He used the Fortran language and an IBM 704 to develop these card counting systems to beat blackjack. Well, he got together with the guy we're talking about today to develop this thing, and it was designed to beat the house at roulette. So the two of them would stand there and they'd try to time the ball and the spinning wheel and predict which side of the roulette wheel it was going to land on. And apparently it was successful enough that they got banned from the casinos.
Yep.
So our guy was into a little bit of everything. And
could I take a guess?
Yep.
Is this the fellow that's one of the founders of Xerox?
Nope. Nope. He was related to a guy, or he was involved with a guy that ended up starting Burroughs, though. So you're close. And Ed Thorpe is still around. He was the father of modern quantitative investing, and he had a big quant fund that beat the S&P by 20% for 20 years, and then quit that. And he's still around, second guessing things and making predictions based on his mathematical background. So another guy, if you're looking for somebody interesting, Ed Thorpe. And then a final a final little clue here. This was a Google dongle that they produced on his birthday, 100th anniversary of a birthday in 2016. He's been called perhaps the most important genius you've never heard of, and a man whose intellect is on the par with Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton. So you got this kind of huge disparity of this genius who's done all these crazy things, and that in itself is kind of interesting. Any other guesses yet? Okay, well, I thought maybe somebody would get it by now. The clue here is some juggling of ones and zeros. So before I get to his name, another little detour. Anybody recognize this guy? He was
Watson?
actually, sorry?
Watson?
No, this guy named Hannibal Ford, and he was born in Dryden, New York. And some of these machines look like they would have come out of Frank's talk last week, but he went to Cornell, and his motto in his Cornell yearbook was, I would construct a machine to do any old thing in any old way. So in a sense, we're getting this feel for these computers that could be programmed and do pretty much anything. So Ford was born in 1877, as I said, in Dryden, died in 1955. And the reason I've stumbled onto him is these machines here are in fact range control devices, basically analog computers used by the Navy during World War II to try to target fire control off of moving ships. So they're big electromechanical analog computers. They weighed a ton and a half on these ships. So that guy, then Ford, led to this guy who is Vannevar Bush at MIT. And the thing he's standing in front of is a differential equations device to solve differential equations, if you will. So it's basically Ford's device multiplied multiple times. And he was running this at MIT and became the advisor to the guy we're talking about, who I guess you're not going to guess, is Claude Shannon. Anybody recognize Claude Shannon's background now?
Information theory.
Yeah, exactly. So he's the father of information theory. You got it. And it says there, they're calling him one of the foremost intellects of the 20th century, the neglected architect of the information age. So at age 21, he wrote his master's thesis at MIT, and it was considered perhaps the most extraordinary master's thesis ever written, and basically set the groundwork for digital circuit design using Boolean algebra to solve some digital circuit design. And that came from Shannon's work at Bell Labs. So already by 1940, Shannon was being hailed as this man of extraordinary brilliance and genius. And he wasn't much into his 20s. And then in 1948, in the Bell System Technical Journal, he came out with the Mathematical Theory of Communications. And this has been called the Magna Carta of the Information Age. Basically his masterwork, where he helped coin the term bit, binary digit, sort of an objective measure of information, and explained how digital codes could allow us to compress and send messages with perfect accuracy. And this is the famous Shannon theorem, basically talking about the capacity that you can get through based on spectrum, antennas, signal to noise ratios. And I was curious about this, and I looked it up, and even 5G networks now, if you look at our leap to 5G and our mobile phones and things, they're still talking about the Shannon limit and trying to approach it. So all going back to this equation, and one of the ways that they're getting this 10 times improvement in our transmission speeds is working on spectrum. They've been allowed more spectrum and using more antennas to try to improve this part of it, all looking at trying to improve the capacity of the systems. And so Shannon's also credited with the introduction of sampling theory, the idea that you could take a continuous time signal and break it down into these bits. And, using that, essentially, you got CDs and DVDs and everything else that we know in terms of the digital world. This is the book. It's funny, when I got started on this too, I bought this online. It was claimed to be used. It would cost me about $3. And it was withdrawn from the Olaf Public Library in Kansas. And I would swear it's never been opened, but very interesting book. I'm happy to lend it to anybody who might have any interest in it. Shannon was interested in everything from juggling, unicycling, chess. He invented a computer that worked in Roman numerals called the throwback machine. He had a rocket-powered Frisbee. And so all in all, very interesting guy. There's also an Amazon Prime, and again, I only found it when I was trying to look this stuff up for today, released in August 2020, a movie called The Bit Player, and it's about Shannon. Very interesting movie. If you're interested, you can stream it online, and once again, pretty interesting book, or a movie rather. So in conclusion here, I'll wrap this up. I was reflecting on this idea of communications, the communications theory that he talked about, how it's one thing to have coding and error correction to improve communications. And I was reminded of a quote that hangs on the wall behind the cash register at the Glenwood Pines. Anybody happen to remember what that thing is? There's a sign there behind the cash register that says, "I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure that you realize that what you heard is not what I meant." And it just kind of tied back to this idea that there's a lot more to communications than perfect conduction of the words. And then I didn't know who McCloskey was either, and took another few minutes to look that up. It turns out he writes children's books. And there's another saying attributed to him that kind of ties to this thing. It's, "So you never can tell what will happen when you learn to play the harmonica." And I was reminded of Claude Shannon's Flaming Trumpet. This whole idea that if you let your mind wander and explore and investigate, no telling what you come up with. And then I'll finish with just another quick communications little story. It's about a German submarine in the Atlantic. It gets a new communications guy, and he's on his first day in the job, and they've given him instructions and show him how the machines work. And he's excited about this, and he sits there and waits. And after a few hours, his first message comes in, but it's in English. And it says, "This is the Royal Navy. Mayday, mayday, we are sinking. I repeat, we are sinking." And the German communications operator sits there.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, what are you thinking? Yes, this is a German command. What are you thinking about? So just interesting issues on communications. And that's the end of it there. I'll stop the share, and I don't know if you have any questions, but once again, it's amazing when I try to prepare these things, the rabbit holes you can fall down and follow the leads, and it's all pretty interesting. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, Mario, what was this guy's personality like?
Well, he ended up being very quiet. When he worked at Bell Labs, he would mostly shut himself in and work alone, and yet appeared to be very approachable when people had a question, and they always marveled at his ability to get at the root of their problems by just kind of tearing it apart and making it simple, and then letting them put it back together for the solution. But they would find him at night in there riding his unicycle down the halls of Bell Labs. And then he went back to MIT after that, and the same sort of thing. He claimed he didn't feel competent to advise anybody, and yet he was treated like a genius. And he crossed paths with Einstein at MIT in those days. And one of the stories in the book is that he was teaching a class, and Einstein came in and whispered to somebody in the back and then left. And after the class, Shannon was all curious, and he went up to the student. He said, "What did Einstein have to say?" And the student said, well, he asked where the tea room was. So he apparently was a very modest guy, but and quiet, but eccentric. He would build these machines in his house, and his house was full of this stuff. And so that Minivac that sits in my garage was just one of the things that he patched together and somebody tried to commercialize.
Personal question, Mario.
Yeah.
How come you still have that in your garage after 60 years?
Well, because it's now worth almost $800. That's, you know, that's part of being a local boy. And so my father had a barn, and when I moved out and left, some of my stuff just got shuffled out of my room so my sisters could take over, and it got buried there. And I, you know, Dominic knows my father, and a few of you other guys know my dad was a member of City Club, and he died about 10 years ago.
Oh.
And so it was really in the process of, well, yeah, 10 years ago, in the process of digging out and cleaning out that old family house that we had to do, that I came across some of these things. So I got moved to my garage. I still have my first IBM PC that had no hard drive on it, green monochrome monitor. Someday I'll get back to those.
Wow.
You don't have any of that stuff in your garage, Peter?
No, I clear it out. Oh, my daughter comes in and says, out, 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 and cleans out the garage and the basement.
I've left a note to my kids, just get a big dumpster and put everything in it. A lot easier for them to part with than these emotionally attached things that I have.
Is the Minivac worth money?
Let's say you can find, if you can find them on eBay, they're going for about 800 bucks.
Okay.
And it turns out a lot of these guys, I don't know if there's a website called Instructables, I think it is, where people are trying to recreate this. And, you know, there's all kinds. In fact, I try to follow one because I'm missing all the little jumper wires for mine. And this guy actually found the specific little pieces that fit onto, you know, 22 gauge wire to make these little jumper cables. People are 3D printing the little dial knobs and stuff even to try to make it an exact replica of this thing. It's interesting. Like you say, you go down all kinds of rabbit holes on the internet.
Yeah, I just say about the same time, 1962, I was building my own computer, but I didn't have to use relays. I got a gift from Ferranti, a local contractor, of memory cards.
Memory cards.
Yes, they actually stored with discrete components, scored 2 bits per card.
Huh. You know, you talk about that. I was trying to figure out if this Minivac is a 6-bit machine or 8-bit machine. There were double pull, double throw relays on it. So I don't know if each of those counts is 2 bits or 4 bits.
Well, yeah.
Whatever it is, it's not much.
Yeah, mine was an 8-bit adder. That was about what it could do. It could add up 8 bits, and then you felt you'd done something. And
well, you know, I remember my
demo
first.
The demo you showed us today ran 1 bit at a time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the second part I didn't show, they had another machine set up to do a little logic question. And again, they get caught up and pushing the wrong buttons, and it's all screwed up.
Well, it's a very educational thing. It shows you what happens in computers is that you press the wrong button. It's still happening today.
Oh, dear. Well, it's it is interesting, and even before this, I had an abacus. My father brought home from one of his trips to Asia, so I guess that might be the first mechanical adding machine I ever had.
I used an abacus at a small art house cinema to keep track of the number of tickets I had sold.
Oh. A way to impress the patrons, I'm sure.
I kept it underneath the desk. There was a desk in front of me, and I just kept, you know, tick, 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 you know, the click clack underneath the desk there, and they kind of looked puzzled, but I just carried on. Part of it was simply to, we were such a small theater that it was a way of making sure we kept as much of the take as possible by working in cash and not giving them tickets, just pushing them into the theater. So I didn't think it up. It was my boss's idea.
I remember in 1981, when I first went to Japan, our accountant in the business there had an abacus on his desk, and he used it all day long. I mean, I didn't know what he was doing, but he was clicking the,
Yeah, you can get pretty fast with those machines.
yeah.
Oh, great.
Okay, well, thank you, Mario. That's another trip down memory lane here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario.
Oh,
Yeah.
Jim.
Yeah, David, I just want to